Our guest this morning is David Bahnsen, but really Bahnsen, right? That's the right way to say it. And many of you already know him. I mean, he's on many of the news programs. He runs a private wealth advising firm. He's doing a lot of work with National Review, and he just came out with a new book recently called Full Time, and where he really tackles this topic of work. And that's where we're going to start our conversation this morning. And David, I want to just jump into like the main kind of core thesis of this book. It seems to me, I'll just throw a summary at you and you respond. It seems to me you're working through this book to restore the importance, the dignity, and the power of work to give our lives purpose. And you're kind of fighting against two very, very interesting forces as you do that. One is the kind of the zeitgeist. There's different cultural things going on. So the post-COVID, work from home, watch video games, sleep on the couch kind of vibe. Retirement, like just this crazy, in some ways crazy views around a retirement. Just that's the finish line kind of idea. But so there's that sort of cultural side and the economic side and all that. Yeah. That bleeds into that. But there's also the church, yeah, and pastors. Yeah. And I should tell you, I was a pastor for 20 years, so no. I'm really offended by that whole chapter. In the
I don't blame you.
Yeah, no, I'm actually not. I really loved it, but just is that respond to that. What is kind of the heart of this book and
yeah, first of all, Chip, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I am encouraged by your guys' mere existence. I really am. I think that you've summarized it very well. There are a couple different animating forces behind the book. And one, you could talk about the culture at large, which ironically became the impetus for the timing of the book. Out of the COVID moment, and particularly the expression non-essential worker, 5 years later, I can barely say it without becoming almost infuriated. Like it's a concept that became more visible to me in the broad culture of a lower regard for work out of the COVID moment that incentivized the timing of the book. But if my critique of work was limited to the broader culture and not specific to my own distinctives as a Christian and observations in the church as a lifetime believer, I wouldn't have written the book. So in a lot of ways, the more motivating factor was the concerns I have about a theology of work inside the church.
Well said, well said. So maybe double click on both those sides, sort of like where the drift is headed or been going for a long time, like culturally, and then also on the church side. Well, and what the correction is.
Yeah. I have this sort of view, it's not always accurate, but that a lot of times it seems to me the church is playing catch up to the world with various bad habits, that the church is sort of lagging the broader culture in certain negative views and practices and whatnot. This is one in which I kind of think the church led the way in a lot of the negative of a lower view of work, that actually even in the unsaved aspect of American culture, the vast majority of the last 250 years, America's had a very high regard for work, certainly relative to our European friends. The American DNA from its founding was very pro-work and out of the Puritan and Pilgrim, founding, and also just, I think, through the 19th century sort of Tocquevillian sensibilities, there was a high regard for the morality of work, the responsibility of work. But even into the 20th century, there was an ambition, an aspiration that was really core to who the American ideal was. And I think that has started to come down, and in a very dangerous way. But the therapeutic aspect of it is what has most depressed me. Out of the COVID moment, I noticed more and more saying, oh, we have this heightened isolation, this heightened depression, this heightened tribalization, particularly for young men. The labor participation force is substantially down in our country since the financial crisis, but it's not down a millimeter for women. all of that diminishment is in men, and it's primarily prime working age men between the ages of 25 and 54. And there's 3.1 million men that have disappeared from the workforce, and I don't mean retirees, and I don't mean 16-year-olds. And a lot of people want to know where they went. And when we approach the subject in the culture of so much of the reason people are burnt out and distressed and upset and depressed is because of working too much, I want to set my hair on fire. I believe that work is not the cause of these problems. I think it is the solution to these problems. That in finding our God-given purpose, that dignity that is embedded in productive, useful activity provides people tremendous avenue for joy and fulfillment in their life, and that the good life that God wants for us is inextricably connected to work.
And would that be like your summary of what work is supposed to be?
It would be a summary. I mean, what I try to do in the book is much more than I normally do in my day job. I'm incapable of talking about finance, entrepreneurialism, economics, apart from my Christian worldview. It's how I was raised. It's what I believe about the world. But the couple other books I've written, and when I'm on TV 3 or 4 times a week, and I always have. Actually, yesterday on Kudlow, I did get to try to connect Milton Friedman to God a little bit, and that threw a lot of people off. But I think that there's always a very direct Christian connectivity to the way I view things. But this book was more exegetical than I normally would be, and it was important for me to unpack the creational norms. And what I mean by that is I'm saying something different than most churches are willing to say. I don't think you're going to find a pastor saying work is terrible, work's not important, quit your job. A lot of them may as well say that, but they don't actually say it. But I'm specifically saying that from the Genesis 1 account of the creation, that God made us for the purpose of work.
That's good. That's good. I want to throw a couple tropes at you that I think we hear a lot in this, that are sort of around this conversation. So, and I've heard some of these things for years. So one of them is, I'm a human being, not a human doing.
Oh God.
How do you really feel about this phrase?
That phrase helped motivate me to write the book. All these things are obviously, by definition, they're meant to be kind of cute and colloquial, so I don't need to be overly critical. But the question is not that I'm a human being, I'm a human being, not a human doing, and that someone like me is going to say, no, you are a human doing, you're not a human being. That's not my pushback. My pushback is a very simple question. Oh, what does it mean to be a human being? So when someone says that they're a human being, not connected from human doing, I will ask you a question. I use this analogy in the book. I want you just to picture real quick a human being by the name of Michael Jordan. How many of you just saw a basketball player? You didn't? You just saw a guy who was there walking around the street, or did you see a basketball player? Because he was a basketball player. And the idea that our being ontologically is disconnected from the things we do is so counter-scriptural, so untrue, it's offensive. But when we are saying I'm a human being, not a human doing, for the purpose of trying to get in front of disconnecting our being from what we do, you have to wonder what the ulterior motive is. God said he made us in his image and likeness, and I want to know what that means. So whatever someone else means by I'm a human being, not a human doing, it sounds to me like they're setting the stage to say how they're a human undoing. But what I want to know is what God meant when he said that he made us to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth.
He's a worker, and he's a builder,
and he's a creator.
And a creator, yeah.
So yes, that trope is one that bothers me, but for a very specific theological reason.
No, well said, well said. Here's another one that we hear a lot, and it's, people say, when people are on their deathbed, see, you already know. You want to finish it?
Well, I say in the book that so many people, no one ever said on their deathbed, I wish I spent more time at the office. And I say, I wish more people would say on their deathbed, I spent more time at the office. And again, it's said for the purpose of, it's somewhat virtue signaling, and I do think oftentimes Pharisaical. And I don't want anyone on their deathbed to say, I have significant regrets that I ignored my spouse or ignored my children. But I do think a lot of people ignore their work, and I don't know why they wouldn't on their deathbed feel regret if they lived their life as a mediocrity. I don't think God wants that for us. I don't think God wants us to waste our life. And so when we say nobody says on their deathbed a certain thing, it isn't true. Some people do have to do a full inventory of their life. And we all, as sinful people, are going to have regrets, and we're all going to fall short in certain categories. But I would suggest that there is, in the evangelical church at large, a systemic issue of people that have been content to ignore what God would have in their work, and therefore on their deathbed, that ought to be part of their overall inventory.
What's it look like when somebody is ignoring their work? Like, what are some of the symptoms, do you think?
Well, even apart from symptoms, which would be in the behavioral or kind of practical side, but just fundamentally what I mean by it is, and this is where the theological critique comes from in the way I think pastors often address the subject. My fundamental claim here is that most inadequate understandings of work in the Christian world stem from viewing work purely as transactional. That we do work so that it can enable us to do the important things. It's important you provide for your family, so you work so you can provide for your family. And it's important that you tithe to your church or give to various Christian ministries and activities that are really important kingdom things, so you work so you can support these other things. And you can go up the ladder. I call the first the level one, because every person's supposed to be a provider and responsible, and work does do that. So I don't discount it. I just merely don't end there. And level two, that you would be in a position to tithe and give, is also a good thing. And then even above that, a lot of people say, you could even become really good in your job and then get the attention and respect of others, and then you'll be a more faithful witness of the gospel. And you'll be in a position to evangelize better from the water cooler because you've worked well. And I don't disagree with that either. But all three of these, I think, are viewing work in what I would call a utilitarian concept, that work enables you to do the important things, but the work itself,
It's just a means to an end,
just a means to an end. Fundamentally, the need of the hour is for Christians to view the work the way God views it, which is that it is intrinsically and inherently valuable. That in creating goods and services that meet the needs of humanity, we are doing what God made us to do. In a fallen world, there are thorns and thistles, there is sweat of the brow. We will work in heaven because God will have redeemed our sinful selves to him and restore the Emmanuel principle of God with us, which is what he made us for, to be with him while we co-created. And this general concept is so important and gives us such a framework for understanding Christian living. God did not make the world completed. God made creation, and he did not say to Adam and Eve, here's how you start a fire. And by the way, if you build a wheel, you're going to be able to move things up and down the road quicker. And I put my phone over there. I think probably everyone in the room is holding an iPhone right now. And I pull it out every time I speak, and I say, there isn't anything, this is the most successful consumer product in human history. Why wasn't it at the Garden of Eden? Well, it was. Every piece of raw material was. There's no new rubber or plastic or metal. The silicon technology we refer to is just a byproduct of human ingenuity. God created human ingenuity, and thousands of years later, we are here in Midtown Manhattan, and we are looking out at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and we are looking at other man-created dynamics, that this co-creation we did with God is a byproduct of us being made in his image and likeness. And so God cares about the worker, who is us, and God cares about the people the work is being done for. None of our work is done just us picking up a rock and throwing it up in the air. The work is transitive. It's being moved from a subject to an object. It is done for a purpose. Some of our endeavors fail. Some of our endeavors feel more, meaningful than others. But my point is, God cares about us as the worker and cares about those who are benefiting from the work, and the idea that the work itself doesn't have meaning, the development of technologies and agriculture and finance and industry and all of the different elements of goods and services we may be in, I think is theologically incoherent. So that's the view of work that I'm advocating for, is one that sees the work as intrinsically important And yet those level 1, 2, and 3 about providing and tithing and all those things are very important. They're just not the fundamental purpose of work. They're means, they're ends that come as a byproduct. But the fundamental intrinsic value of work is that it's what God created us to do.
They're not really at the center of the circle of the way God designed work.
No, and that level 2 one, by the way, is particularly problematic theologically, because it's the sacred secular distinction thing that I go do my work. And so here in Manhattan, it could be finance or media or technology or whatever. But then we say, and then, by doing that, I make a pretty good living. And now I can go support kingdom. I can give to a church and give to missions. And I'm a really, really big believer in church and missions. But I do not accept a definition of the kingdom of God that says finance and media and technology are not part of the kingdom of God, but church and missions are. I think that's a dualism that is really unhelpful throughout church history.
So there's a mindset, philosophical component to this. It's like, so one big question for us is, how do we view our work? And do we have that sort of transactional, utilitarian view of our work? I mean, we might even say our work is second class. It's not really kingdom work, and we're just funding the kingdom work. So that's a test. It's kind of a question piece. And moving from that forward to that idea of symptoms, what do you think when somebody doesn't have that kind of integrated view or that high view of work, the way you've described it? What's it look like? Like, how do you, what are some tells on the outside that maybe that's off?
I got to say the same caveat I said. You heard me speak. What was the name of the house?
Hepzibah House.
Say it again.
Hepzibah House.
I still can't pronounce
it.
it.
Don't say Hezbollah House.
Yeah, no, I think I've accidentally said that before. Even my pastor here in the city, John Tyson, he did a podcast with me on the subject. And I will say this, and not just being flattering to a lot of the people in the room, I think the general message to Christians in New York City is pretty different than it would be to an awful lot of suburban evangelicals throughout the country, because there is a certain aspiration that's pretty core to the DNA of New York City. Like, it's very hard to work here and not be an ambitious person. And yet I think generally speaking, the approach I'm most critical of that may be less prevalent here in Manhattan is an approach that views work as something I have to do, but I don't want to do. And whether it is counting the days to this concept called retirement, which I have a whole chapter in the book critiquing, or just this idea of going home and telling your kids, I worked all day so I could put food on the table. I think those are both very unhealthy and problematic attitudes. There is not a systemic issue probably in this room, but there is obviously a systemic issue in the country of not people who have a poor attitude towards work, but of people who are not working. The labor participation force for men in the aforementioned group is 84%. There were 84% of men working in the Great Depression. The only difference is that it's voluntary now and it was involuntary then. That the unemployment rate was so high because there were not jobs.
They were actually looking.
They most certainly were working, desperately were looking. And that now the labor participation force, which is different than the BLS unemployment rate, is measuring the lack of workers. And so there is this stereotype that is unfortunately a stereotype for a reason of a significant increase in disgruntled young men that are smoking a lot of pot and playing a lot of video games and having a very hard time entering adult life. So that's one pretty obvious element that's easier to critique because it is so dramatic and I think very problematic and really robbing people of joy and opportunity for a good life. Then even within the realm of responsibly employed people that get up and go to work every day, this is where I have a heart for my Christian friends. The kind of symptomatic side would be just not approaching it with that right attitude or with that right ambition, being stuck in a mindset of victimhood. I just have a dead-end job. I hate this. I have to do it though. But then really as a 50-year-old guy who is very blessed to have loved my career, every moment of it, including some just extraordinary stress and challenges that I don't regret for a second, I can't tell you how often I deal with middle-aged men that look back on the first half of their life and say, you know, that part was really difficult, but now I have a little financial freedom, and now in the second half of my life, I'm going to do something more meaningful. And that's a big symptomatic issue too, of determining that the work was just a path in the first half of our life to do something meaningful in the second half. And I want desperately for more people reaching middle age of life to not feel that way.
Yeah, it's all meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, or it has the potential to be the way we approach it. That's really good. So what do you say to the guy who's working and turns down the promotion for the more demanding role for the sake of work-life balance? Well, another one of your favorite phrases, by the way, work-life balance.
So that one also has a whole chapter in the book, and it is, and if you don't want to read the book, that chapter was published at National Review when the book came out last year, and that is an expression that I hold in utter contempt. And people will say, are you suggesting that the only thing we should do in our lives is work? And I say, no, but is that what work-life balance because it's a very odd grammar that we have. So if I believe work is a vital part of our life, why am I trying to manage a vital part of my life with my life? Well, I think marriage is a vital part of my life. So my little game I like to play is asking people who use the expression work-life balance, how many of them have ever said it about anything else in their life ever? And do you go home, and it's nice that we're just a men's group here this morning, how many of you go home and say, honey, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm doing marriage-life balance. Nobody's ever said those words, ever. They're sleeping on the couch. We do it only with work. Work's the only thing that we found a cute little way to try to put walls around. Now, what they mean, and I suggest in the book, the biblical language is work-rest paradigm. God worked 6 and then rested 1 and then told us to do the same and then told us the reason we are to do the same is because he did it. So that's a normative, that's a commandment. And I know a lot of people that are willing to take on the commandment of the rest part. But I don't know why the 6 days shalt thou labor part is not taken as the commandment, only the rest part. But ironically, we don't even get the rest part right. You know, instead of saying God asked us to take a whole day to rest and that he made that day for us, instead we have this bizarre demand where we want our bosses to put in like yoga classes in the office in the middle of the afternoon or some kind of thing. Like there's this just really strange view of how we're supposed to obtain that rest. But yeah, work-life balance, I think, is incoherent grammatically and really, unfortunately, set up as a cultural block to diminish the importance of work.
So back to the guy who's offered a promotion that will be a more responsive, broader scope, more demanding role.
So my view is that the bias in the church has largely been any decision that requires a prudential consideration. It requires wisdom. It requires the thing that the whole book of Proverbs was written for. And that there is a bias to say, this is going to cut into some family time, therefore clearly the right thing to do is turn down the promotion. Or this is going to cut into some volunteer activities. Obviously the right thing to do is cut back. That I by no means would suggest that in every case, the right thing to do is lean into more work, more promotion, more, what have you. But prudentially, I reject the idea that the bias is lined up the right way. That oftentimes it might very well be the right thing to do to lean into the promotion, count the cost, discuss with your spouse, evaluate the pros and cons, but that generally speaking, ambition is an incredibly biblical thing. And to constantly err on the side of non-ambition doesn't strike me as prudentially wise or biblically normative. Now, that's a macro question, and unfortunately always would require a micro answer. So I can't say to Johnny and Billy every time take the promotion. If Johnny's already struggling in his marriage and his wife is going through a particular period, it may be the wrong time for him to be taking a certain promotion that's going to require him to travel more and so forth. Like I'm very sensitive to those micro considerations, but at a macro level, I would reject the idea that we are to always lean into the notion that anything requiring more work commitment is wrong and anything requiring less work commitment is right. I simply do not believe that's true.
It's like it's set up as an opt-out, like it's just automatic,
Yeah.
and so you're coming against the bias. Let's go into
By the way, many of our spouses want us working more, just so we're clear.
get out of here, make more money. Just let's shift gears a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, highlights from your childhood. Maybe yeah. Let's just start right there. Let's just rewind.
Highlights from my childhood. I was blessed. My father was a wonderful man. He died when he was 47. I was 20, and he was a Christian intellectual, philosopher, apologist, a brilliant theologian, and was my best friend. And that's the highlight of my childhood, is being raised by Greg Bahnsen, who taught me to think and live like a believer. And I grew up in Southern California. And then we have been bi-coastal here in New York for 8 years now. I'm here in New York City most of the time. I actually fly to California tonight, and I haven't been there in over a month, but I'm generally splitting up time between both coasts each month. But being raised as a preacher's kid, my dad worked very, very hard. And so I learned that work ethic, but also this kind of concept of Christian worldview, trying to think like a believer. That really all came from him. And going through, I talk about this in the introduction of the book. A lot of my belief about work is a byproduct of being incredibly grateful to God that through the traumatic pain and challenge of losing my dad as I entered young adult life, the work was very cathartic for me. And I don't think that was because God said, hey, you're going through something and you're either going to be distracted by really unhealthy diversions, or there could be a healthy diversion, so let's go with the work one. I think that the work one was healthy because that's by design, that I was able to find a certain purpose in my life, and I have no doubt in my mind that God used work in that regard. So that was a lot of my journey. And I think I mentioned I'm 50 now, so it's been 30 years since all that happened. It goes by very quickly. But I had 3 kids, 20, 17, and 14. I think it's 3, 2 or 3, 3, yeah. See, I always think that's funny because I'm talking about how important family and work both are, and then I pretend like I don't know how many kids I have, but really I do. And my wife's usually here with me, and she doesn't think it's very funny, but and so yeah, that's our story.
So it sounds like, just reading between the lines of the book, your mother died before your father died.
No, she didn't die, but she was gone from
She
the
was
family.
gone. She was gone from the family. So there was some pain and loss there too.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that what helped elevate your father as kind of the rock in your life?
Yeah, and I'm open book about it all, but my mom was kind of a troubled woman and took off and was gone. We never saw her again, and had some mental challenges and whatnot. So then that was a difficult thing. I was younger, and my dad and I became very close in the aftermath of that. And we already were, but I mean, that obviously really, especially in my teenage years, bonded us in a different way. And then he was sick. He had a heart condition. It was his 3rd open heart surgery, so God took him very young. And so out of that, I would say it's not just the normal trauma. Anyone who suffered a loss of whether a parent or whatnot, that's just an awful thing to go through for anybody. But I think being 20 can be a very difficult thing to go through too, even with living parents, because you're trying to figure out what you're going to do in your life and who you are. And so I needed to kind of figure that out. And now I needed to do it as an orphan and a broke orphan. And, without the only person who I really cared about their opinion, that guidance and mentorship was gone. So I felt very alone. Yeah. But God really looked after me.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast with Adam Scott was being interviewed, and he talked about his mother dying, and I think before Severance came out, and just saying she was the one person in the world he wanted to see it, and she couldn't see it anymore, and that was like part of the loss. And that sounds a little bit like what you're saying about your dad.
Yeah.
What do you miss most about him?
It's funny because 30 years later, it doesn't feel like 30 years to me. It would be 30 years this year in December. He passed in December of 95. And I think that we talk about what we're going through in our country's political moment, or different things I've gone through in my marriage, or things I've gone through in the business. There just is on a daily basis something I could ask him for advice on, and he's not there. And I still, 30 years later, struggle to find someone else whose opinion I care about as much as his. I would love to get his counsel. So I have to settle for others, or I just ask someone down on Sixth Avenue or something, and but no, my dad was a sounding board, and I just miss not having him, whether it's on a personal thing in my life, or even just broadly the things that weigh on me in our country and in the church and that type of stuff. I wish I had that. I do. Yeah.
One more question for me, and then we'll throw it open to the guys. You mentioned the decline of friendship in your book, and I have a personal question and a philosophical question. So the personal question is, who are the friends what's friendship look like in your life? Like, who are the friends that have carried you through?
Yeah.
And the philosophical question is, how does the decline of friendship in your view connect to the decline of work?
Well,
Yeah.
there's a chapter in the book where I borrow heavily from a guy, Nick Epperstadt, who's the best demographer on a lot of this stuff out there. And I spent some time with Arthur Brooks in Washington, D.C. last week, and he's done a lot on this. I pretty much buy into a rather simplistic but nevertheless useful paradigm for a happy life. That happiness, most often you find people have four components. And if you check all four boxes, it's very rare that you're going to identify as an unhappy person. And that is generally some belief in the transcendent, some faith, family, people who love you unconditionally, and then what he calls community, but friendship, non-familial bonds that connect us, and then fourth is work, purpose. And people might have two or three of them and still be doing okay. 4 out of 4 is the quadfecta. 0 out of 4 is not good. And a lot of people right now are working on 0 or 1 out of 4. And the biggest declines we see, like in the broad secular culture, there's a view of family I don't happen to agree with, but there's not a lot of people saying family isn't important. Like, you cannot run for president in our country and say, I'm so tired of family. Marriage is not good. Kids are not important. A lot of people live that way. I think a lot of, there is a certain secular ideology that might more consistently come out and say it, but for the most part, you can't say family is not important. Just Western civilization was built off a building block of family. And even in their own, sometimes idolatrous way, there's a pretty high regard for spirituality, for some transcendence, for some sort of faith commitments. I don't think a lot of people are super connected to the specifics of the Orthodox Christian faith that I am, but there is still a better sort of sentimental regard for family and faith. The ones that have suffered the most, I think, are friendship, community, and work. And I think those feed off each other. I'm very critical of the work from home movement. I just don't believe that man was made to be alone. There's a certain marriage mandate in there. There is this Emmanuel principle of God wanting to be with us. And when we're cut off from communion with God, that can feed a certain loneliness. But I do believe an awful lot of people spend an awful lot more time without friends, and by working remotely, there is less social interaction. That doesn't mean your closest friendships are necessarily always in the office. It's funny, I have 80 people in my company now, and I did not hire anyone I knew already for a long time. I happen to have 2 employees now are people that I've known for a long time, they're close friends. But I resisted doing that for a very long time. Now I've become friends with most of the people within the organization, but I think that there is a sense in which work provides social interaction that's very healthy and organic, and a lot of people aren't getting that. And then as our society has largely become increasingly secular, there's a less regard for the real definition of friendship, of a sort of covenantal bind to someone, caring about your community, caring about people you grew up with. I guess I can say it because we're all men here, but like, I don't want it to be misunderstood. I think men and women are different on this to some degree. I am still best of friends with every single person who was in my wedding party. and I'll be married 24 years this year. I don't think that's always the case for women, and I'll avoid saying what I really want to say because you don't know me well enough to you'll
Oh,
interpret it
come
as
on. Tell us what you really want to say.
women have a harder time keeping friendships than men do. How's that?
I think that's true.
I do
actually.
too.
I think
it's empirically undeniable.
they
But
may have an ease sometimes getting to know each other, sort of at a superficial level, I think, but the deep, long-lasting friendships, yeah, I think it's anecdotal, but I would agree.
And I think in my case, I'm just incredibly blessed that I look at the 4 or 5 people that are the best friends in my life. They've been the best friends in my life for 25 or 30 years, and in two particular cases since high school. So I'm an old man now, over 35 years, and that's a wonderful blessing and joy. I think that more men need to develop friendships that become lifetime friendships, and there is a connectivity. It may be. On the Venn diagram that there's just an overlap and it's not one and the same, but between our work life and our approach to friendship, there is some connectivity there.
It's great. All right, guys. I'm sure you'll have some, here we go. The hands are popping up.
Please don't tell your wives what I said about why they don't have any friends.
We're just going to post it in big bold letters on the internet, brother. That's what we're going to do.
Good morning. Thank you for being here with us, David. Quick question about just like in terms of like if we have a high view of work as Christians and like we believe that's the core to who we are and who God made us to be, I guess I sense among young men that are ambitious Christians that there are potentially some industries that are harder for Christians to be in, that are like the extremes. I'm talking about investment banking, private equity, places where there are things that seem incompatible. I'm not talking about the work itself. I'm talking about the hours, about like there's not a day to rest or there's not a day for family. I guess, how does that work with your paradigm of work? And happy to hear all honest thoughts, but just wanted to ask that just in the context of some of the young guys I know.
Yeah, so the analogies in investment banking and private equity are kind of my favorite analogies because they're basically what I believe, that's the work ethic I think people should have in every industry. And so I wouldn't view it as those are outliers in a negative way. I think those are normatives, and I'd like everyone to catch up to the work ethic of private equity. Now, that's a shocking thing to say, and a lot of pastors would be uncomfortable with it. But here's the thing I've said a lot. If you are a believer and you have an unsaved friend and you lead that person to the Lord, and that person has had a tremendous problem with pornography or some sexual sin or excessive drinking or a drug abuse or some just, issue like that in their life. You say, you're a Christian now, you have to give this up. You have to stop. This is not appropriate activity for a Christian, and let's disciple you and work with you to get rid of this bondage, this area of sin. So it's very easy for all of us to say, yeah, with areas of sexual, drug, alcohol, that we let that go. I say, hey, you've brought someone to the Lord, and they work in private equity. Do you have to tell them to get rid of that now? Now, if they worship manna, that's not what we're talking about. And I have a chapter 5 in my book is distinguishing. There are a gazillion warnings in the Bible about love of money. How many verses are there in the Bible? Even if you're just trying to contort scripture the way people love to do, how many verses in the Bible are there even indirectly warning people against working too hard? Not one. Not even one that could be like rhyming with that. So to the extent investment banking, private equity lend themselves to a very hard work ethic, I view that as a good thing. To the extent there are people in any industry that love power, love money, love, some form of sinful behavior, that represents the real underlying issue. But do I think that intrinsically the work ethic, see, part of it is, I don't think it's true that you have to work 120 hours a week in private equity. I think early on in one's career, there's certain sacrifices that are a little bit more severe than others. And that's a good thing. But I know a gazillion people in this town that have been very successful in different elements of finance, from private wealth management to investment banking to hedge funds, what have you, that work hours that I think are totally reasonable. And so I would not caution people against going in those sectors. I would caution people that are in other sectors that aren't working enough to maybe emulate some of that.
And we don't throw shade on doctors who have to do like in their residency and all that, they have to do these crazy rotations. And we don't throw shade on farmers who during seed time and harvest work crazy hours. We don't throw shade on them.
No, that's a good point.
It's just certain industries we kind of pick on.
That's right.
I'm one of your subscribers, so I appreciate your work.
Thank you.
But I have a question for you. I'd love your thoughts. You know, you were about at the age where your dad died, and you know the impact it had on you. How is that impacting how you are relating to your boys now?
Yeah, throughout, not just now, but even throughout their whole upbringing, like I've always really treasured the role of being a dad. And, you know, I have 2 sons and 1 daughter, and my oldest now is 20. So I'm a few years older than Dad was when he died. And my son is the same age I was when he died. And he's taken to, my son is actually an undergrad student at the same school my dad went for undergrad. So he's really taken on a lot of wanting to kind of learn more about this grandpa he never met and so forth. None of my kids ever met any of their 4 grandparents. And so that changes the way you have to raise them. For one thing, we always had to pay for childcare. So all of you who had parents who helped, I hate you. But the reality is that I don't take it for granted. Now, the other piece, though, is I can't wake up every day saying, I could die today. I need to call my son and say goodbye or something. Like, you know, you can't really live that way. But there is a just sort of lived experience that makes you appreciate that more. And I do my best to be in my kids' lives in a very normal, organic way. But in the back of my mind, in ways I wouldn't say to them, I'm always thinking, like, if I were gone, have I left them the legacy that I want relationally? Do they know, to the extent it's true, because I don't think our kids ever can know, that how unconditional my love for them is? Because my dad's love for me and his mother, my grandmother, her love for me, there's only 2 people in my life I'd say that about, was incredible unconditional love. That's what I want, is my kids to know how unconditional my love for them is.
Great, well said.
Thank you, David, for speaking to us, and I look forward to reading full time.
Thank you.
I'm interested in your thoughts about the relationship between the diminishment of work and the diminishment of marriage and family, in the context maybe of fear of responsibility, or what would be your take on that? Thank you.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot in the book and a lot of study I've done since, and I'm going to continue working on this. You know, I have a view of economics that it is essentially human action, and that there is this need for freedom and virtue to be properly harmonized for us to find the good life. And I believe that the family and work function is incredibly pro-cyclical. And so what that means is that you are always either going to be feeding a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. And so I've become very fond of using these terms when I'm talking about younger men, that employable men are marryable and marryable men are employable. And then, therefore, unemployable men are not marryable, and vice versa. And that is, oh, thank you so much, Brendan. I think that there is a really important component to that. Women are brilliant. They have a reason made by God instinctively to not be attracted to unmotivated men. And a man who can hold a job, who gets up, who takes responsibility seriously, who has to do sacrifices, who can handle having to do a task they didn't necessarily want to do and they still do it, that's a person that has certain character traits that are more attractive. And likewise, a person who can be involved in a relationship, make a commitment, be there for another person, self-sacrifice, there's character traits there that are attractive to an employer. So this family and work dynamic, like so much in the Christian life, is not mutually exclusive. And I talked about it before with Chip about friendship in the same domain. Ultimately, I know very few men that are just unmarriable that I'd want to hire. I would be willing to guess that most men we wouldn't want to hire, I don't think there's a lot of women that want to marry them. And so we need to all at once establish this virtuous cycle that people find a life mate, they find life skills, they find purpose, this is kind of God's design for our life. And I recognize that the venue for it, the specific ages, my parents were married 20, 21. My wife and I were 27, 25. And I know these days it's all the vogue to get married at 38 or something. But I mean, I have my own opinions about it, but that's not even my agenda here. It's just to reestablish this idea that he who finds a wife finds something that is good from the Lord, and finding purpose in work is part of what God made us for. And when you get both things going at once, you just exponentially increase your chance of finding shalom.
Well said.
Good morning, David. Thank
Morning.
you so much. I'd love to get your perspective on the broader movements that impact the world of work. Thinking of corporatism, globalism. If a society is very focused on GDP, it's easy to say, hey, women, get out of the home and get into a cubicle. And once she gets there, the corporation will gleefully pay for her abortion. And if you're a man at that same corporation, they'll gladly teach you about sodomy. So what is the impact of these broader movements on the world of work?
Well, so again, that's a very different category than whatever corporatism is and whatever globalism is. So there's a few different things you give me there, but I have opinions on all of them, but I think they're all separate from one another. But the notion of the work environment being a place where there is hostility to Christian values, I don't think it's new, but I do think it has felt significantly more profound, a higher magnitude in more recent years. And I was on Cuddler's show yesterday, and I had an op-ed yesterday at foxnews.com about how much a lot of this is reversing. There's certain things in the realm of DEI and ESG and a lot of the kind of culture war type issues where a lot of believers or conservatives or whatever the case may be felt under assault over the last 5 years, that the pendulum is substantially shifted the other way. Now, are there companies that continue to participate in bad behavior? There most certainly is. I think in a fallen world that's going to be impossible to ever get rid of entirely. But marginally, here's the question I always say. A mid-level person who's subject to bad policies at work that are hostile to their faith, we think of that as a problem, and I do. But I also believe that if we had more Christians who were not at the mid-level but at the high level, then we'd have less of those policies from a top-down standpoint. But how do I get more Christians affecting corporate policy in corporate America when the church continues to say that the corner office is no place for a Christian? So there's a catch-22 here. You cannot affect this change if there are not more Christians in leadership and bringing their Christian values to work in a way that allows us to do the business of business, which is business. So trying to implement a radical hostile agenda can be countered by men and women of faith being in the workforce and being in a position of dominion in the workforce. That would be my objective. There are different trends that exist. They're not limited to the marketplace. Secularism writ large is a problem. And yet I think the only response to it is faithful obedience. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, David, for your insightfulness. You referred to the political moment, and it's clear that we are in a political moment where there is great divisiveness,
So I'm not the only one who's noticed this.
So, two questions. How does the difficulty of this political moment impact the work environment that we're talking about? And then what can we as believers, as the church, do to enhance the political and work environment?
Well, I guess so. Some of it depends on whether or not we're thinking the same way or talking the same way about what we mean by political moment. But you said the divisiveness, and that's what I'm getting at. I think that there has been a roughly 50-50 divide in the country between left and right, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, more or less forever. It's certainly since World War II. The difference now is it was never the case in my childhood. I was the biggest Ronald Reagan fan as a 10-year-old you ever met. I was a real cool kid. You have no idea. never did it occur to me that people in red and blue states are supposed to hate each other. Never. This notion now where there's a belief that we want to deify a president we like, or hate a president we don't like, or hate the people who like a president, or hate the people who don't like the president. This tribalism, intensified by cable, by social media, by technology, whatever we want to blame it on. But there's a lot of cultural milieu that's made it far worse. And I think that we're all living through that in a lot of ways. But when you say, what can we do about it? This is the thing I say constantly. There is nothing we can do about it other than being truth tellers. Waking up every day, we can have opinions. In my particular case, I'm just guessing a number, but I happen to, from a policy standpoint, find myself on the side of the current administration about 79% of the time, and 21% I don't. That is, the 21 is too high of a number for a lot of people out there, and the 79 is way too high of a number for a lot of other people out there. I just don't care. I just don't care. I'm not going to pretend I agree with things I don't, and I'm not going to do the opposite either. And I think us disconnecting from the tribalism to be truth tellers in the workforce, in our personal lives, in our social interactions would go a long way. Just not being afraid of trying to be on a particular side on a given issue. Now, that's not to say we don't have opinions or beliefs, because I do. It's just that we have made these things way too tribalistic, and that deteriorates friendship. But I also believe, and this makes me sound squishy to some people, I don't understand why some hate folks for their political beliefs, but I also don't understand why some of us hate others for their political beliefs. I can vehemently disagree with someone in some particular policy issue, but no, I do not. I do not believe that we're doing a good job at understanding the health of having a society that we can disagree with one another. And I think we largely did that for a long time, and we've gotten away from it. And if we think the divisiveness is bad now, I think it can and will get a lot worse if we don't put this genie back in the bottle.
Hi, yes. I was wondering, your relationship with your father, how did he model and what did it look like the time that you did spend with him, in the sense that you say he was your best friend, which is beautiful, and I love that. How did he balance his time between work and rest and spending time family-wise, and what does that look like also today as you're modeling with your children, the amount of work, like let's say hour-wise, you said it earlier, 120 is a lot, so what's an appropriate amount in your opinion between spending family time and work time and kind of all that?
Yeah, so quickly, in terms of my dad, he was a really big believer in the 6-in-1 model, and he lived that the entire time I knew him. So he worked 6 days a week, and he rested on Sundays. He was a pastor, so he's preaching Sunday, and then Sunday afternoons we were watching football and getting Chinese food and sitting on the couch talking. He would take a nap and whatnot. But like on Saturdays, you know, he worked, and I talk about it in the book of my fondest memory. As more or less as a kid, every morning I'd get up. He had a home study, and every morning he would be in his study working, every morning. So then, like, as I got to be older, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to get up early today. I'm a big boy now. I'm going to get up at 6:30 in the morning and beat him. And I'd get up, and he was already there. I go, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do it at 6 a.m. And he was already up. And then I'd do 5:30, and he was already up, and 5. And finally, I just said, I give up, you know. So now I get up at 3:45 every single morning. And I will tell you, I think I kind of do it because of him. I'm just hoping somewhere he's up there going, okay, you got me beat now. You know, I don't know. I don't think, yeah. So he modeled it, and he never once said, I do this work because I have to, I hate it, but if I'm going to feed you guys, I have to do it. He just loved, and he worked in Christian scholarship. And you know, this is another thing, is unlike me, he wasn't exactly living in the economic benefits of his hard work. Like, there's a market reward for how hard I work that he never got to experience. And that is even more impressive to me, because I do believe I have a biblical understanding of work, but I'm handsomely rewarded for how hard I work, where, he didn't ever live in that kind of economic benefit and blessing. And that makes it even more impressive to me. The thing you said about, there's a chapter in the book about, we all want to believe there's a formula, and the hours is the way we think about it. And that's understandable because we are finite people that are limited by time and space. And I believe capital is not a scarce commodity. And I believe that because of human ingenuity, most goods and services do not have to be scarce. We have the ability to take scarcity and create abundance from it. But the one thing we've never been able to game is time. And I say that, my kids are older now, but I say this to people, younger kids, and thank God my wife was so supportive of this. But it is just untrue that there is like a set formula that there were Tuesday nights I was home at 6 o'clock having dinner with the family, and there were Wednesday nights I didn't come home till 10 o'clock at night. And it was different in certain situations. There were 10 o'clock in the mornings that I was leaving the office to go to my kids' poetry reading or some stupid thing. And kidding. It's awesome. And I think that people need to realize that balance is not a day-to-day thing. It's often seasonal. Like, in other words, throughout the ebb and flow of our whole life, there's seasons of life. I think you mentioned you're from East Hampton. My wife and I have a house in East Hampton, and in the summertime, I'm out there a lot more. I try to get out there, and then we're doing dinner as a family a lot. We take advantage of it, and I have to go back and forth with the city and whatnot, but that's just a certain limited part of the year. I don't think that there's a set formula to it. And so the analogy I use in the book is that we want to view this as if our life were our closet, and that there's a section for our sweaters and a section for our shirts, and that we're trying to get this exact asset allocation and compartmentalization right. And I don't think that's a fair expectation, that there are just simply times where, because of time and space, we are unable to be at all places at once. And sometimes we need to be in the office or wherever our work venue is, and other times we need to be at home, and it requires wisdom. It requires prayer. And I think too many people are guilt manipulating themselves around it. You have to be present for your family. And there's no part of anything I've said today that takes away from that. But what I believe is a easier temptation for Christians today is to use their familial responsibilities to diminish their professional ones. And I don't meet a lot of people that are using their professional responsibilities to diminish their familial. I mean, a lot of people that might do that outside the church, but in the church, I think the weight of the challenge has gone the other way.
Well said.
Is that helpful?
Brian, wrap us up, brother.
So going back to a comment you had, 2 comments back, actually made me change my question. You're talking about the tribalism. I'm 46, so know sort of how I remember things from 20, 30 years ago, where you could have a difference of opinion, but because your identity was not wrapped up in that position, you could even vehemently disagree, but have a beer or pal around, or at least get along with someone from the other view. What would you say would be either the decline of not even just Christian, but faith generally? And so people are looking to other things for identity, and their identity is either the right or the left, or this view or that view. What are your thoughts around the changes, whether it's faith or other changes that have made it that this is my identity, and if you're challenging my identity, now it's a heated issue, and I hate you versus I just disagree with you?
Well, I even wish that it was just simply a matter of that they've decided to make their identity in an ism, like, well, so many things have been hollowed out, and so now my identity is in being in conservatism or progressivism. But even those things, they're willing to redefine around a cult of personality, because it's become so tribalistic. It isn't even about an ideology. It's just really become a side for the sake of taking a side in a lot of cases. But the question as to what to do about it has to be answered by how did it come to be. And how it came to be is exactly the things we've been talking about today. That there's basically, to me, two extremes that are outside the American ethos and the vision our founders had. And one is a totalitarianism or heavy statism where the federal government is the centerpiece of our lives and that we get our existence and meaning from being part of the collective. And so that heavy collectivism is deeply unchristian and problematic and anti-American. But this rugged individualism that is disconnected from community, disconnected from family, and disconnected from civil society is equally problematic and equally atheistic, I would say. And unfortunately, what we've done is we've basically become a society on one of those two extremes of a heavy collectivist view. We get our identity from being part of something, or a heavy individualistic, where my own autonomy, often manifested in a sexual autonomy, but my own autonomy is where what matters most. And I think the vision for a healthy life comes from us realizing that God made us both as individuals and as members of communities. We're embodied people that are to be part of families and be part of neighborhoods and be part of churches. And so I don't think people go home and either flick on MSNBC all night or Fox News all night if they're actually part of a Rotary Club or New Canaan Society or a church or, hanging out with their family, like healthy, normal activities. That stuff has declined, friendship, family, and other things that go therewith. And therefore, it has caused people to entrench deeper into some of this tribalistic division and really become, it's very difficult to maintain friendships with the other side when you view the world that way. So I'm not advocating for political neutrality or a both sides-ism or third way-ism. I have very strong opinions on almost any issue that comes up in current political discourse. My point is that coexisting with folks should not be so difficult. And that, I think it comes from the fact that we don't have a healthy civil society that is rooted fundamentally to family as a building block, and then community that comes out of families. What is a community but a group of families? So we have a lower regard for family, which means a lower regard for community, which means a higher regard for either collectivism or a radical autonomous individualism. I think they're both very dangerous. And it doesn't seem to be going well. So.
Yeah, how's that working for you, kind of thing. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Let's thank David. What a feast this morning.
Thank you.
Guys, grab this book. It's called Full Time. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Before you go, talk with one of your brothers at your table, and because sometimes the most important thing that's said in this room is actually what happens between you as you digest what you've heard. And I was thinking of three things that you might want to consider. First of all, we talked a lot about work, and how does your view of your work need to be rebooted? Like what needs to be adjusted to your view of work? I think when you said something, it was near the end, you talked about you could either on a vicious cycle or a virtual cycle. I love that. Which are you on? I think that's just a great question. And then the idea of being a truth teller, not like hurting people with the truth, but just being a truth teller, not filtering, not being so nervous about what we might say. Yeah, who do you need to tell truth to? I think that's another great, just kind of practical takeaway from this presentation. So, David, thanks again so much here. Woody, pray us out, brother.
Thanks, David. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for today. Thank you for the challenge for our work, that all work is unto you. You created it, and we get to go to work with you today, whether we're in Wall Street or whether we're in the church or somewhere else. We're bringing you with us wherever we go. So thank you for the challenge. Help us to work unto you, that you're watching over us, that we're doing our best for you today. And then other people that are around us are seeing that, and then we're a light in that space where other people can know who we believe in, and we thank you for that. Thank you for NCS and the challenge that we have every Thursday to come and to be challenged just like this, to help us to be the workers that we need to be, the husbands, the fathers, and the friends. Thank you for today. Thank you for these brothers. I pray that you would help us all to be your children in your field today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks for coming, guys. Keep coming back. It
Works if you work it.
if you work it.